From shadows on stone, to water slowly counting hours, to gears that changed how we lived, to watches that helped in wars, to crystals ticking billions of times each second, to watches that track our heartbeat. This is our journey to understand time. Sit back and enjoy. The sun hung low over the Nile Delta, painting the temple walls in shades of amber and gold. Imagine a young priest in the service of Ra, standing motionless in the courtyard, his eyes fixed on something that would change everything. It wasn't the god speaking to him, though his fellow priests might have thought so. It was something far more subtle, far more profound. It was the shadow. Every morning for weeks, this priest watched the great obelisk that stood at the temple's center. He noticed how its shadow moved across the stone floor, always in the same direction, always at the same pace. When the shadow stretched longest, the morning prayers began. When it shrank to almost nothing, the midday offerings were made. And when it lengthened again in the opposite direction, the evening rituals commenced. But one day was different. This day, he marked the shadow's position with small stones at various points throughout the hours. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, he saw something remarkable. The pattern repeated itself, day after day, with an almost perfect consistency. The shadow wasn't just moving. It was measuring something invisible, something that flowed constantly like the Nile itself, yet left no trace behind. Whether such a moment of discovery happened exactly this way, we cannot know for certain. But the evidence tells us that someone, somewhere in ancient Egypt, made this crucial observation. Archaeological evidence shows ancient Egyptians were among the first civilizations to systematically measure time around 3500 BC. The massive stone obelisks they erected weren't just monuments to pharaohs or gods. They were also primitive timekeeping devices. The careful positioning and scale of these structures suggests humans had developed a sophisticated understanding of solar movement, transforming the abstract concept of time into something concrete and measurable. The human need for time. Before we delve into the fascinating journey of how humans learned to capture and measure time, we must ask ourselves, why did we need to do this at all? Animals don't wear watches. Trees don't check calendars. Yet humans, from the earliest civilizations, felt compelled to divide, measure, and track this invisible force that governs existence. The answer lies in the very nature of civilization itself. When humans transitioned from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agricultural communities, they needed to predict the seasons. When to plant? When to harvest? When would the floods come? These questions weren't merely practical. They were matters of survival. Missing the planting season by even a few weeks could mean the difference between abundance and starvation. But there was more to it than just agriculture. As societies grew more complex, so did their needs. Religious ceremonies needed to be coordinated. Markets needed operating hours. Workers needed to know when to start and stop their labor. Ships needed to know when tides would change. The growing complexity of early civilizations created an increasing demand for more precise time measurement, a need that would drive thousands of years of innovation. Early humans probably began by observing the most obvious cycles: day and night, the phases of the moon, the changing seasons. These natural rhythms provided the first calendar systems. The lunar month, roughly 29.5 days, was one of the earliest ways humans organized longer periods of time. Many ancient calendars, from Mesopotamia to China, were based on lunar cycles, but daily life required finer divisions. Knowing it was daytime wasn't specific enough for coordinating activities or scheduling important events. Humans needed something more precise, something that could divide the day itself into manageable segments. This need would drive thousands of years of innovation, from simple shadow sticks to the atomic clocks that now define our modern world. The celestial clock, our ancestors' first clock, was the sky itself. Long before any human-made device, The sun, moon, and stars served as the ultimate timekeepers. This wasn't just primitive astronomy. It was the foundation of all future timekeeping technology. The sun's daily journey across the sky was the most obvious measure of time. Sunrise marked the beginning of the day, sunset its end. But observant people noticed more subtle patterns. The sun rose and set at slightly different positions on the horizon throughout the year. At certain times, called the summer and winter solstices, it reached its northernmost and southernmost points. These astronomical events could be predicted, and they repeated year after year with remarkable consistency. The ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Mayans, Chinese, and many other civilizations independently discovered these patterns and used them to create calendars. The Egyptian calendar, for example, was closely tied to the annual flooding of the Nile River, which itself was linked to celestial events. The appearance of the star Sirius on the eastern horizon just before sunrise signaled that the Nile's floods were imminent, a critical piece of information for Egyptian agriculture. At night, the stars provided their own celestial clock. The ancient Greeks used specific star constellations to mark the hours of darkness. Sailors learned to navigate by the stars, using their positions to determine both location and time. The North Star, or Polaris, became particularly important because it remained relatively fixed while other stars appeared to rotate around it, a direct result of Earth's rotation. Ancient texts and the astronomical alignments of structures like Stonehenge and the pyramids reveal that ancient peoples had a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. They understood that these heavenly bodies moved in predictable patterns, and they used this knowledge not just for practical purposes like agriculture and navigation, but also for religious and ceremonial reasons. The sky was both clock and cathedral, a source of practical knowledge and spiritual wonder. Chapter 2. When shadows became clocks. The obelisk that young Amenhotep observed in our opening story wasn't unique. Beginning around 3500 BC, ancient Egyptians erected massive stone monuments throughout their kingdom. These obelisks, often standing dozens of feet tall and weighing many tons, served multiple purposes. They were tributes to pharaohs, monuments to the sun god Ra, and, whether intentionally or accidentally, some of the world's first public clocks. The principle was elegantly simple. As the sun moved across the sky, these towering structures cast long shadows that changed in both length and direction throughout the day. In the morning, when the sun was in the east, the shadow pointed west and was relatively long. As noon approached, the shadow shortened dramatically, nearly disappearing when the sun was directly overhead. In the afternoon, the shadow grew longer again, but now pointed in the opposite direction. Egyptians could use these shadow patterns to divide the day into segments. When the shadow reached certain marked positions, it was time for specific activities: prayers, meals, changing of guards, or the opening and closing of markets. This wasn't just timekeeping. It was the birth of the scheduled society, where activities were coordinated according to agreed-upon divisions of the day. But there was a problem with these massive obelisks, and it was a problem that would challenge timekeepers for millennia. They weren't portable, and their accuracy depended on latitude and season. An obelisk in Memphis would cast different shadow patterns than one in Alexandria. The shadows in summer were shorter than in winter. These limitations this could imply spurred the development of more sophisticated sundial designs. The portable sundial revolution. Around 1500 BC, Egyptian engineers developed something revolutionary: the portable sundial, often called the Egyptian shadow clock. This device represented a major leap forward in timekeeping technology. Unlike the massive obelisks, these shadow clocks could be carried, set up anywhere, and used by individuals rather than just at public monuments. The design was ingenious in its simplicity. Picture a T-shaped or L-shaped device with a raised bar at one end. The long horizontal base was marked with divisions, typically 6 marks representing the morning hours. The raised bar cast a shadow on these marks as the sun moved across the sky. At noon, when the sun was highest, the user would turn the entire device 180 degrees, and it would then measure the afternoon hours as the sun continued its journey toward the western horizon. These portable sundials gave Egyptians a way to measure time anywhere. In temples, homes, military camps, or government buildings. The widespread adoption of these devices suggests that timekeeping was becoming democratized, spreading beyond just the priestly and ruling classes to a broader segment of society. When more people have access to time measurement, society itself can become more organized and coordinated. But the Egyptians weren't alone in developing shadow-based timekeeping. Archaeological evidence shows that the ancient Babylonians, who lived in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, developed their own versions of sundials around the same period. The Babylonians are particularly notable for their mathematical innovations, including the division of the circle into 360 degrees and the development of the base 60 number system that still influences how we measure time today. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. The Greek mathematical mind. While the Egyptians and Babylonians pioneered shadow clocks, it was the ancient Greeks who elevated sundial design to an art form through mathematics and geometry. Historical records indicate that Greek sundials first appeared around 560 BC, possibly introduced by the philosopher Anaximander of Miletus. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, the Greeks initially learned about sundials from the Babylonians, but they quickly improved upon the designs using their advanced understanding of geometry. The Greeks understood that Earth is a sphere, and that the sun's apparent motion across the sky is actually caused by Earth's rotation. This insight, revolutionary for its time, allowed them to create sundials that were far more sophisticated than simple shadow sticks. They developed the hemispherical sundial, hemicycle, a remarkable device that consisted of a bowl-shaped depression carved into stone with a pointer, called a gnomon, extending from its center. The genius of the hemispherical sundial was that it could account for the changing seasons. Throughout the year, as the sun's path across the sky shifted between summer and winter positions, the shadow traced different arcs on the bowl's interior surface. Greek engineers carved multiple arc lines into the sundial's surface, each representing a different time of year. This allowed the user to read both the time of day and information about the current season, a significant improvement over earlier designs. The Greeks also understood a critical principle. For a sundial to be accurate, its gnomon needed to point toward the celestial pole, essentially toward the North Star. When aligned this way, the sundial could more accurately track the hours regardless of season. This discovery represented a fundamental advance in understanding how to compensate for Earth's tilted axis and its orbit around the sun. By about 280 BC, the Greek astronomer Aristarchus of Samos created sophisticated hemispherical sundials that divided the day into 12 equal hours. However, there was an interesting quirk. These weren't equal hours in the sense we understand today. Instead, they were seasonal hours, or temporary hours. The daylight period was always divided into 12 segments regardless of whether it was summer, long days, or winter, short days. This meant that a summer hour was longer than a winter hour, which might seem strange to us but made perfect sense in a pre-industrial society where most activities were tied to daylight. Greek cities soon featured sundials in public squares, at temples, and in private homes. The Tower of the Winds in Athens, constructed around 100 BC, showcased no fewer than 9 sundials on its exterior walls, each facing a different direction to catch the sun at various times of day. This structure also contained a sophisticated water clock, showing that Greeks understood the importance of having multiple methods for measuring time. Rome's timekeeping adoption. The Romans, as they did with much Greek technology and culture, enthusiastically adopted and spread sundial technology throughout their empire. Historical records indicate that Rome acquired its first sundial in 263 BC. Though there's an amusing story behind this. The sundial was war booty, captured from the Samnites during military campaigns. The Romans installed it in a public place with great fanfare, never bothering to adjust it for Rome's different latitude. For nearly a century, the sundial gave incorrect readings, yet Romans apparently used it anyway. It wasn't until around 164 BC that Rome finally commissioned a sundial specifically designed for the city's latitude. From then on, sundials became ubiquitous throughout the Roman Empire. They appeared in forums, bathhouses, military camps, and wealthy homes. Portable sundials became fashionable accessories for the elite, some small enough to fit in a pocket. The Romans also left us fascinating records of how sundials impacted daily life. One famous joke attributed to Emperor Trajan shows how familiar sundials had become in Roman culture. Upon seeing someone with a particularly prominent nose, the emperor quipped, "If you put your nose facing the sun and open your mouth wide, you'll show all the passers-by the time of day," essentially calling the person's nose a sundial. But not everyone appreciated this new structured approach to time. The Roman playwright Plautus, writing around 200 BC, had one of his characters complain bitterly. "The gods damn that man who first discovered the hours, and who first set up a sundial here. Who's smashed the day into bits for poor me? When I was a boy, my belly was my only sundial, far the best and truest compared to all these. It told me when to eat, except when there was nothing to eat." This humorous lament captures a fundamental truth. The measurement and division of time changed human behavior, creating schedules and obligations where before people might have simply followed natural hunger and tiredness. Islamic Golden Age innovations. After the fall of the Roman Empire, sundial technology continued to evolve, particularly in the Islamic world during what historians call the Islamic Golden Age, roughly 8th to 14th centuries AD. Muslim scholars and astronomers had a particular interest in precise timekeeping because Islamic religious practice requires prayers at 5 specific times each day, times that shift throughout the year based on the sun's position. Islamic astronomers made several important contributions to sundial technology. They fully developed the concept of the gnomon aligned with the celestial pole, creating what we now call equatorial sundials. They also used advanced trigonometry, itself largely developed by Muslim mathematicians, to design sundials for specific latitudes, accounting for the sun's changing declination throughout the year. Particularly innovative were Islamic sundials that showed not just the time of day, but also the specific times for the 5 daily prayers. Some sundials from this period are incredibly ornate, featuring precise mathematical calculations engraved in Arabic alongside beautiful geometric patterns that reflected Islamic artistic traditions. By the 13th century, the Muslim scholar Abu al-Hasan al-Marakushi wrote extensively about sundial construction, describing how to create hour lines on cylindrical, conical, and various other types of sundials. Historical texts suggest he was among the first to advocate for equal hours, hours of the same length throughout the year, at least for astronomical purposes. This was a significant conceptual shift that would eventually become standard across the world. The sundial's limitations. Despite their sophistication, sundials had inherent limitations that would ultimately lead to the development of other timekeeping methods. The most obvious problem: they only worked when the sun was visible. Cloudy days, nighttime, and indoor spaces required alternative methods of measuring time. Additionally, sundials showed solar time, the actual position of the sun in the sky, which varies throughout the year due to Earth's elliptical orbit and axial tilt. This means that solar noon, when the sun is highest in the sky, doesn't always occur at exactly 12, according to the average time we use in daily life. Different locations also require different sundials. A sundial designed for use in London would give incorrect readings in Rome and completely wrong readings at the equator or in the southern hemisphere. As trade and communication between distant regions increased throughout the ancient and medieval periods, the need for a more universal and transportable timekeeping method became increasingly urgent. Furthermore, sundials couldn't measure very short periods of time with precision. The shadow moved slowly, making it difficult to determine exact minutes and impossible to measure seconds. For many daily activities, knowing approximately what hour it was proved sufficient, but certain tasks, scientific experiments, cooking times, or coordinating multiple activities required greater precision. These limitations didn't make sundials obsolete immediately. In fact, sundials remained important time references well into the 19th century, even after mechanical clocks became common. Early clocks were so inaccurate that they needed to be regularly reset using sundials. But the limitations of shadow-based timekeeping meant that ingenious minds would search for alternatives, leading to one of humanity's most ingenious inventions: the water clock. Chapter 3. The water that measured hours. While shadows tracked the sun's journey, another form of timekeeping was developing independently across multiple ancient civilizations: the water clock, or klepsydra, meaning water thief in Greek. The concept was elegant. Water flowing at a relatively constant rate could measure time. If it takes 1 hour for a container to fill or empty, then marking that container at intervals allows you to measure portions of that hour. The oldest known water clock comes from ancient Egypt, found in the tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep I, dating to around 1500 BC. However, written references suggest that water clocks may have been used even earlier. The tomb inscription of an Egyptian court official named Amenemhet, who served in the 18th dynasty, identifies him as the inventor of this technology, though the inscription may refer to improvements rather than the original invention. The earliest water clocks were outflow klepsydrae, containers with a small hole near the bottom. As water dripped out at a steady rate, the falling water level revealed marks on the container's interior that indicated how much time had passed. These marks were carefully calibrated, though the engineers soon discovered a problem. Water pressure changes as the container empties. A full container creates more pressure at the hole, causing water to flow faster. As the water level drops, pressure decreases and flow slows down. This physical challenge led to ingenious solutions. Around 100 BC, inventors began creating conical containers, narrow at the bottom, wide at the top. This shape helped compensate for the changing pressure, maintaining a more constant flow rate. Other designs added constantly dripping water at the top to maintain a consistent level, using the overflow to measure time instead. Water clocks. Around the world, water clock technology appeared independently in multiple civilizations, suggesting that the basic concept was intuitive enough that different cultures discovered it separately. In ancient Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, historical texts reference water clocks used for timing night watches and astronomical observations, though no physical examples have survived in the archaeological record. China developed sophisticated water clocks remarkably early. Historical records indicate that water clocks existed during the Shang dynasty, around 1500 BC, though some accounts blend history with legend. By the second millennium BC, Chinese engineers were definitely building water clocks, and by the first millennium BC, these clocks had become quite advanced. One of the most remarkable Chinese water clocks was the astronomical clock tower built by Su Song in 1092 AD. This massive structure stood over 30 feet tall and combined a water clock with an astronomical display and a mechanical gearwork. The clock used a water wheel and liquid mercury to power an armillary sphere, a model of celestial objects, and could even predict eclipses. Though destroyed when Su Song's dynasty fell, modern historians consider it a masterpiece of medieval engineering that wouldn't be matched in complexity until the European mechanical clocks of the 14th century. The Greeks embraced water clocks enthusiastically. They used them in courts to limit speaking time during trials, literally giving speakers a limited amount of time that would physically run out. The Romans adopted this practice, and the Latin phrase aquam dare, to give water, came to mean granting someone permission to speak. The widespread use of water clocks in legal settings reveals how even in ancient times, societies recognized the need to manage time in formal proceedings to prevent endless debates. The Tower of the Winds. The Tower of the Winds in Athens represents one of the ancient world's most sophisticated timekeeping structures. Built in the 2nd or 1st century BC, this octagonal marble tower featured not just multiple sundials, but also an elaborate water clock inside. While the external sundials told time during daylight, the internal water clock kept time at night and on cloudy days. The water clock mechanism inside the Tower of the Winds was likely quite complex, possibly incorporating gongs and moving figures that marked the hours. Though the original mechanism is lost to history, based on what we know from descriptions and archaeological evidence, it probably featured a steady water flow that turned wheels connected to hands or markers showing the time. The Tower of the Winds also included a weather vane on top, hence its name, making it a multi-purpose scientific instrument. It served as a clock, sundial, weather station, and compass, all in one beautiful marble structure that still stands in Athens today, a testament to ancient Greek engineering prowess. Islamic water clock mastery. During the Islamic Golden Age, water clock technology reached its peak sophistication. Muslim engineers created water clocks that were marvels of mechanical complexity, rivaling or exceeding anything that would be built in Europe until the Renaissance. These Islamic water clocks, known in Arabic as fanjan, often featured elaborate automata, mechanical figures that would perform actions at certain times. Some clocks had mechanical falcons that would drop balls into vases on the hour. Others featured mechanical musicians that would play instruments, or doors that would open and close to reveal different displays. One famous clock had a mechanical peacock that would spread its tail at regular intervals. The sophistication of these devices was extraordinary. They used complex gear trains, escapement mechanisms, and even segmental and epicyclic gearing, gear systems that allow for complex movements and greater precision. Historical records describe these clocks in detail, though sadly, very few physical examples survive to the present day. A particularly notable water clock was described by the medieval Spanish-Arab engineer Ibn Khalaf al-Muradi in the 11th century. His treatise on machines included detailed descriptions of water clocks that employed both segmental and epicyclic gearing, technology that wouldn't appear in European clocks for several more centuries. The sophistication of these Islamic designs indicates that knowledge of complex gearing systems existed in the Islamic world well before they became common in European mechanical engineering. These clocks served both practical and propaganda purposes. Rulers would commission elaborate water clocks as displays of wealth, technological prowess, and the sophistication of their courts. When Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad, sent an elephant and an elaborate water clock as gifts to Charlemagne in 797 AD, or possibly 801 AD. It was meant to demonstrate the superior technology of the Islamic world. And it apparently worked, as European observers described the clock with amazement and wonder. The limitations that led to revolution. Despite their sophistication, water clocks had their own set of problems that would ultimately make them unsuitable as the long-term solution for accurate timekeeping. The most significant issue was temperature sensitivity. Water freezes in cold weather and evaporates more quickly in heat. In the cold winters of Northern Europe, water clocks were essentially useless, forcing medieval Europeans to seek alternatives. Water clocks also required constant maintenance. The water flow needed monitoring and adjustment. Containers needed refilling. The mechanisms needed cleaning to prevent mineral buildup from hard water. Any variation in water viscosity, which changes with temperature, would affect accuracy. And despite all the clever engineering, water clocks remained less accurate than would eventually be needed for scientific and navigation purposes. Furthermore, water clocks were difficult to transport. You can't easily carry a container of water on horseback or onto a ship. The water would slosh around, disrupting the flow mechanism. For a civilization increasingly interested in exploration, trade, and military campaigns, the need for a portable, reliable, all-weather timekeeping device was becoming critical. These limitations, combined with the ongoing problems of sundials, created a technological challenge that medieval European monks would eventually solve through a revolutionary invention, the mechanical clock. But before we explore that breakthrough, we need to understand why medieval Europe was so desperate for better timekeeping technology. And the answer lies in the monasteries, where the daily rhythm of prayers created an urgent need for reliable time measurement at all hours, in all weather throughout the year. Chapter 4. The bells that changed the world. In the cold darkness of a medieval monastery, a monk sat huddled in the stone tower, his only light a small oil lamp that flickered in the draught. His job was one of the most important in the monastery, though also one of the most tedious. He was the timekeeper, responsible for waking the other monks for prayers throughout the night. Missing even one prayer service was considered a serious spiritual failure. The question that plagued him was simple but crucial. How could he know when it was time to ring the bells when the night was pitch black? Clouds obscured the stars, and the water in the clepsydra kept freezing. This problem, multiplied across thousands of monasteries throughout medieval Europe, would drive one of the most important technological innovations in human history, the mechanical clock. The monastic need for time. To understand why mechanical clocks were invented in medieval Europe and not elsewhere, we must understand the unique demands of Christian monasticism, particularly as practiced in Western Europe. Monastic orders, especially the Benedictines and Cistercians, structured their entire day around a cycle of prayers called the Divine Office or Opus Dei, the work of God. This prayer cycle consisted of 7 or 8 services spread throughout the day and night. Matins, around 2 or 3 a.m., Lauds, at dawn, Prime, around 6 a.m., Terce, around 9 a.m., Sext, around noon, None, around 3 p.m., Vespers, at sunset, and Compline, before bed, around 7 to 9 p.m. The exact times varied with the season, but the monks needed to gather together for each service, requiring someone to keep track of time and ring the monastery bells to summon the community. In warmer climates like Italy or Spain, water clocks could manage this task for much of the year. But in Northern Europe, England, France, Germany, the Low Countries, winter temperatures regularly froze water. The monks needed an alternative, and that alternative became one of history's most revolutionary inventions. The first mechanical alarms. Before the full mechanical clock was invented, there were mechanical alarms, devices that could ring a bell at predetermined intervals. These alarms, developed sometime in the 10th or 11th century, used a type of mechanism called an escapement. An escapement is a device that releases stored energy in small, regulated increments. Think of it like a dam with gates that open and close repeatedly, releasing water bit by bit rather than all at once. Early mechanical alarms used falling weights, just like a cuckoo clock. A heavy weight attached to a rope or chain would slowly descend, pulling the rope and turning a spindle. The escapement mechanism would control how fast the weight fell, making the descent occur over a specific period, say 1 hour or 2 hours. When the weight reached the bottom, a mechanism would release a hammer that struck a bell. This alarm didn't tell time in the sense of saying, "It's 3 o'clock." Instead, it measured intervals. 1 hour has passed, or 2 hours have passed. The monk on watch duty would reset it after each bell ringing, but this was already a significant improvement over sitting and watching water drip or trying to read the stars through cloudy skies. Historical records indicate that these mechanical bell-striking alarms were the direct predecessors of the mechanical clock. The key innovation was the escapement, which would remain the heart of mechanical clocks for the next 7 centuries, until the Quartz Revolution in the 20th century. The mystery of the first mechanical clock. Here's where the historical record becomes frustratingly unclear. We don't know exactly who invented the first true mechanical clock, nor exactly when or where it happened. This ambiguity has led to centuries of debate among historians, and it's a reminder that most major inventions are actually gradual processes rather than sudden eureka moments by a single inventor. What we do know is that mechanical clocks began appearing in Europe during the late 13th and early 14th centuries. Some sources credit Pope Sylvester II with bringing clock technology to Northern and Western Europe around 1000 AD, though the nature of his clocks is unclear. A historical record from 1176 mentions an horloge clock installed at Sens Cathedral in France, but we don't know if this was a mechanical clock or a sophisticated water clock. The first unambiguous references to mechanical clocks appear in the early 1300s. By 1314, there's a definitive record of a mechanical clock in Caen, France. In 1321, Dante Alighieri describes a clock mechanism in his Divine Comedy, suggesting that mechanical clocks were familiar enough to his readers that he could use them as a literary reference. By 1344, large mechanical clocks were installed in Padua, Italy, and by the end of the 14th century, over 70 European cities had installed public tower clocks. The 2 most famous early mechanical clocks for which we have detailed descriptions are the clock built by Richard of Wallingford at St. Albans Abbey in England, completed around 1336, and the astronomical clock created by Giovanni da Dondi in Padua, Italy, completed in 1364. Neither of these original clocks survives, but modern engineers have built working reproductions based on the detailed descriptions and diagrams that the inventors left behind. How the early mechanical clock worked. The early mechanical clock was a marvel of engineering for its time, though it would seem primitive by modern standards. At its heart was the weight-driven power source, a heavy stone or metal weight attached to a rope wound around a cylinder or drum. Gravity pulled the weight downward, causing the drum to rotate, which provided power to the clock's mechanisms. But here's the problem. If left unchecked, the weight would simply fall rapidly, spinning the drum wildly. The clock needed a way to regulate this descent, to make it happen slowly and steadily over hours rather than seconds. This is where the escapement came in. The earliest mechanical clocks used what's called a verge and foliot escapement. Picture a vertical rod, the verge, with 2 flat plates, pallets, sticking out at the top. These pallets alternately catch and release the teeth of a crown-shaped gear, the crown wheel or escape wheel. Attached to the top of the verge is the foliot, a horizontal bar with adjustable weights on each end. Here's how it worked. As the crown wheel tries to turn, pulled by the descending weight, one of the verge's pallets catches a tooth on the wheel, stopping it. The momentum causes the verge to twist slightly, releasing that tooth and allowing the wheel to advance until the other pallet catches the next tooth. This alternating catch and release action produces the characteristic tick-tock sound of mechanical clocks. By adjusting the weights on the foliot, clockmakers could speed up or slow down the rate at which the escapement allowed the wheel to advance, thus regulating the clock's rate. This mechanism was ingenious but not particularly accurate. Early mechanical clocks could easily lose or gain 15 minutes or more per day. They typically had only one hand, an hour hand, because they weren't accurate enough to bother with minute markings. Despite this limited precision, They represented a revolutionary advance. A clock that could run day and night, in any weather, indoors or outdoors. And that could be theoretically installed anywhere without worrying about latitude, solar position, or water supply. The Tower Clock Revolution. Once the basic mechanical clock technology was developed, it spread rapidly across Europe. Cities competed to install impressive tower clocks in churches, town halls, and other prominent buildings. These clocks served multiple purposes. They were practical timekeeping devices. They were status symbols showing a city's wealth and sophistication. They were technological wonders that attracted visitors, and they were public declarations of civic pride. The Salisbury Cathedral clock, built around 1386 in England, is often cited as the oldest working clock in the world, though this claim is debated, and remarkably, it still has most of its original parts. The Wells Cathedral clock, built in 1392, features not just a working timepiece, but also elaborate automata, mechanical figures that move when the clock strikes. Every 15 minutes, mechanical knights mounted on a circular track joust with each other, providing entertainment as well as timekeeping. These tower clocks were massive affairs. The Salisbury clock weighs over 1,200 pounds and had to be wound manually every day. But they were visible and audible throughout the town. The clock bells could be heard for miles, synchronizing the activities of thousands of people. For the first time in history, an entire city could operate on the same schedule, coordinating markets, work times, curfews, and meetings with unprecedented precision. This development had profound social implications. Before mechanical clocks, time was somewhat flexible and local. Noon was when the sun reached its highest point, which varied by longitude. Work began at sunrise and ended at sunset, naturally varying with the seasons. But tower clocks established standardized equal hours that didn't change with the seasons. A clock hour in January was the same length as a clock hour in July. This seems obvious to us now, but it represented a significant conceptual shift from the seasonal hours that had dominated for thousands of years. The clockwork universe. The mechanical clock also had philosophical and religious implications that reverberated through European thought. The clock became a powerful metaphor for the universe itself. If a clockmaker could create a device with many moving parts that all worked together in perfect harmony, governed by mathematical principles, perhaps God had created the universe in the same way. A vast cosmic clockwork running according to divine laws. This clockwork metaphor became central to the scientific revolution. Philosophers and scientists like René Descartes and Isaac Newton would later develop mechanistic views of nature, imagining the universe as a great machine operating according to mathematical laws. The mechanical clock wasn't just a tool, it was a model for understanding reality itself. But not everyone welcomed this increasing temporal precision. As cities scheduled more aspects of daily life according to clock time, some people felt that life was becoming more regimented and less natural. The Roman playwright Plautus had complained about sundials centuries earlier. Now medieval and Renaissance writers complained about mechanical clocks imposing their tyranny over human life. Yet the process was irreversible. Once society had tasted the benefits of coordinated time, markets that opened and closed on schedule, ships that departed predictably, workers who arrived at agreed-upon times, there was no going back. The spread beyond Europe. While the mechanical clock was a distinctly European invention, driven by the specific needs of Christian monasteries and Northern European climates, the technology didn't remain confined to Europe. By the 15th and 16th centuries, mechanical clocks were being exported to other parts of the world, sometimes as diplomatic gifts, sometimes through trade. In China, Jesuit missionaries introduced European mechanical clocks in the 16th and 17th centuries. The Chinese, who had their own sophisticated timekeeping traditions, were fascinated by these foreign devices. The Qing emperors collected European clocks, some of which featured elaborate automata and decorations. However, China didn't immediately adopt mechanical clock technology for public use, partly because their existing timekeeping systems worked well for their needs. In the Islamic world, Mechanical clocks gradually supplemented the sophisticated water clocks that had been used for centuries. Islamic astronomers appreciated the mechanical clock's precision for their astronomical observations, though the tradition of using sundials and astronomical observations for determining prayer times continued. In the Americas, mechanical clocks arrived with European colonization. Native American and pre-Columbian civilizations had their own sophisticated calendar systems, the Maya calendar being particularly famous for its complexity and accuracy, but they hadn't developed mechanical timekeeping devices. The introduction of European clocks was part of the broader cultural transformation that followed European contact. Chapter 5. The Spring That Changed Everything. For all their revolutionary importance, early mechanical clocks had a significant limitation. They couldn't easily be moved. The weight-driven mechanism required the weights to hang down several feet, meaning the clock needed to be mounted on a wall or in a tower with sufficient vertical space. You couldn't put one in your pocket or take it on a voyage. A traveling merchant, a ship's captain, or a military commander had no way to carry an accurate timepiece. They still relied on sundials, hourglasses, which measured fixed intervals rather than telling time, or their own estimation. This changed around 1500–1510 with one of the most important innovations in timekeeping history, the mainspring. This simple device, a coiled spring that stores energy when wound and releases it gradually as it unwinds, made portable clocks possible for the first time. And at the center of this innovation was a German locksmith named Peter Henlein. Peter Henlein and the birth of the pocket watch. Peter Henlein was a master locksmith in Nuremberg, Germany in the early 16th century. Locks in this era were themselves mechanical marvels, using springs and clever mechanisms to secure valuable property. Henlein, skilled in working with small metal parts and spring mechanisms, had the perfect background for miniaturizing clock technology. Historical records from 1462 mention a pocket clock offered by an Italian clockmaker to a nobleman, suggesting that the idea of portable timepieces existed before Henlein. However, Henlein is credited with being the first to successfully manufacture portable spring-driven clocks on a regular basis, beginning around 1510 and certainly by 1524. Henlein's innovation was to replace the falling weight power source with a coiled mainspring. When you wind a spring-powered clock, you're storing energy in the coiled spring. As the spring slowly unwinds, it releases that energy through the clock's gears and escapement, driving the mechanism. This meant the clock didn't need to hang on a wall. It could sit on a table or be carried in a person's clothing. These early spring-driven clocks were quite large by modern standards, more like small round boxes than today's pocket watches. They were often egg-shaped or spherical, and they were expensive luxury items affordable only by the wealthy. But they represented a major step forward. For the first time, a person could carry a personal timekeeper. The problems with spring power. The mainspring solved the portability problem but introduced a new challenge. As the spring unwinds, the force it exerts decreases. A fully wound mainspring provides strong force. A nearly unwound spring provides weak force. This changing force affects the speed at which the clock runs, making spring-driven clocks less accurate than weight-driven tower clocks. Early clockmakers struggled with this mainspring problem for decades. The clocks would run fast when freshly wound and slow down as the spring unwound. Various solutions were attempted. One approach was the stack-freed, a supplementary spring with a cam that produced varying resistance to compensate for the changing mainspring force. Another was the fusee, a cleverly shaped cone that the mainspring pulled via a chain, designed so that the mechanical advantage changed as the spring unwound, keeping the force more constant. These were brilliant engineering solutions, but they added complexity and cost to already expensive devices. Despite the accuracy issues, spring-driven portable clocks spread rapidly across Europe during the 16th century. By mid-century, the introduction of screw fasteners allowed clockmakers to create flatter, more compact designs that truly deserved the name pocket watch. The glass cover innovation. early portable clocks had metal covers that protected the dial. You had to open the cover to see the time, not particularly convenient. Around 1550, clockmakers began using glass or rock crystal covers, allowing the user to see the dial without opening the device. This might seem like a minor change, but it significantly improved the user experience and helped establish the aesthetic that we still associate with watches today. A visible dial behind a transparent protective cover. These early watches were still quite thick and bulky, often worn on a chain around the neck rather than in a pocket. They had only an hour hand, as the mechanisms weren't accurate enough to warrant minute marking. But they were fashionable, impressive, and they announced their owner's wealth and status. The social impact of portable timekeeping. The spread of pocket watches, even though initially limited to the wealthy, began changing how people thought about time. Owning a personal timepiece meant you were no longer dependent on public clocks or sundials. You could schedule your own activities with greater precision. You could arrive at meetings on time as defined by your watch, rather than by when the sun reached a certain position or when the church bells rang. This could imply that personal watches contributed to the growing sense of individualism in Renaissance and early modern Europe. Time was becoming not just a public resource controlled by churches and governments, but also a personal commodity that individuals could possess and manage for themselves. The personal watch also became a symbol of professional respectability. Merchants, doctors, lawyers, and government officials carried watches as marks of their status and reliability. Owning a watch suggested you were a person who valued punctuality, who scheduled appointments, who lived a structured and disciplined life, all qualities associated with success in the emerging commercial economy of early modern Europe. Advances in accuracy. Despite the social importance of pocket watches, they remained frustratingly inaccurate throughout the 16th and much of the 17th century. Even the best watches could easily lose or gain an hour per day. This was acceptable for general daily scheduling, but inadequate for scientific measurements, navigation, or precise coordination of activities. The breakthrough came in 1656, when Dutch scientist Christian Huygens invented the pendulum clock. Huygens had studied the work of Galileo Galilei, who in the 1580s had discovered that a pendulum swings with a remarkably consistent period, the time it takes to complete one swing. Galileo had even sketched out a design for a pendulum clock before his death in 1642, but never built one. Huygens' pendulum clock used the regular swing of a weighted pendulum to regulate the escapement mechanism. Because a pendulum's period is determined by its length and the force of gravity, not by how far it swings or how much force drives it, pendulum clocks were dramatically more accurate than any previous timekeeping device. Huygens' first pendulum clock had an error of less than 1 minute per day, compared to 15 minutes or more for typical mechanical clocks without pendulums. Later refinements brought the error down to less than 10 seconds per day. The pendulum clock solved the accuracy problem for stationary clocks, but didn't help with portable watches. You can't wear a swinging pendulum on your wrist or in your pocket. Huygens addressed this around 1675 by inventing the balance wheel and balance spring, also called a hairspring. This system uses a small wheel that oscillates back and forth, controlled by a tiny coiled spring. The balance wheel serves essentially the same purpose as a pendulum, providing a consistent oscillating regulator, but in a form compact enough for pocket watches. This innovation allowed 17th century pocket watches to keep time within about 10 minutes per day, a dramatic improvement over earlier models. It also meant that watches could finally justify having a minute hand, which gradually became standard during this period. The longitude problem and Harrison's chronometer. While pocket watches were useful for daily life, there was one critical application where accurate timekeeping could literally mean life or death: navigation at sea. Determining latitude, how far north or south you are, is relatively straightforward using celestial observations. But determining longitude, how far east or west you are, requires comparing local time, when the sun is highest in the sky where you are, with the time at a reference location, such as Greenwich, England. The problem was that no clock in the early 18th century could maintain accuracy over weeks or months at sea, where temperature changes, the ship's motion and humidity variations would all affect the mechanism. Ships regularly became lost, sometimes with tragic results. In 1707, a British naval fleet misjudged its position and wrecked on the rocks near the Scilly Isles, killing nearly 2,000 sailors. In response, the British government offered a substantial prize, the Longitude Prize, to anyone who could solve the longitude problem. An English clockmaker named John Harrison spent decades developing a series of marine chronometers, extremely precise clocks that could keep accurate time even aboard a moving ship. Harrison's H4 chronometer, completed in 1759, was accurate to within 1/3 of a second per day, even after months at sea. This was an extraordinary achievement that finally made accurate longitude determination possible. Harrison's work established the chronometer as a critical navigation tool. By the 19th century, accurate chronometers were standard equipment on naval and merchant vessels, making sea travel safer and more efficient. The term chronometer became specifically associated with these highly accurate portable timepieces, and earning chronometer certification became a mark of exceptional quality for watchmakers. Chapter 6. Time in your pocket. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, pocket watches were becoming more common among the professional and merchant classes, though still expensive enough to be significant investments. The technology continued to improve, and with it came stylistic innovations that made pocket watches not just timekeepers but fashion statements and personal expressions. Around 1675, a new fashion emerged, credited to King Charles II of England, wearing the pocket watch in a pocket rather than on a chain around the neck. This simple change in how the watch was carried led to the term pocket watch and influenced the design of men's clothing. Tailors began adding watch pockets to waistcoats and breeches specifically to accommodate these valuable devices. The watch chain, often decorated with fobs and seals, became an important masculine accessory. Glass covers became standard, replacing the earlier metal lids. Watchmakers developed different case styles to suit various preferences and needs. The open-face watch had a glass crystal over the dial but no cover. The full hunter case had a metal lid that snapped closed to protect the crystal and dial, often featuring intricate engravings or personal initials. The half hunter case had a metal cover with a small window or cutout, allowing the wearer to check the approximate time without opening the case fully. The lever escapement revolution. The most important technical innovation for pocket watches in the 18th century was the invention of the lever escapement by English clockmaker Thomas Mudge around 1755. Previous escapements, including the verge escapement that had been used since medieval times, interfered significantly with the balance wheel's oscillation, limiting accuracy. Mudge's lever escapement allowed the balance wheel to oscillate more freely, with the lever only briefly engaging during each swing. This dramatically improved timekeeping accuracy. A pocket watch with a lever escapement could keep time to within about a minute per day. Acceptable precision for most practical purposes. However, the lever escapement was complex and difficult to manufacture. It wasn't widely adopted until the early 19th century, when improved manufacturing techniques made it more practical to produce. After about 1820, the lever escapement became the standard mechanism in quality watches, and it remains the basis of mechanical watches to this day. Mass production and standardization. For most of their history, watches were custom-made by individual craftsmen or small workshops. Each watch was slightly different, and parts from one watch wouldn't fit another, even if both came from the same maker. This meant repairs were time-consuming and expensive. A broken gear or wheel might need to be custom manufactured to replace the original. This changed in 1857 when the American Watch Company in Waltham, Massachusetts, introduced the Waltham Model 57, the first watch made with interchangeable parts. Using precision machinery and standardized measurements, the factory could produce parts that were identical enough to be swapped between watches. This dramatically reduced manufacturing costs and made repairs simpler and cheaper. The American Watch Company's innovation launched the era of industrialized watchmaking. By the late 19th century, American factories were producing hundreds of thousands of watches per year, making pocket watches affordable for the middle class and even working class consumers. Similar mass production techniques spread to Switzerland, which had been the center of traditional handcrafted watchmaking, leading to Swiss companies like Longines, pioneering factory watch production. This democratization of timekeeping had profound social effects. When only the wealthy owned watches, punctuality was somewhat flexible and negotiable. But when nearly everyone had a watch, social expectations around time became more rigid. Being late for work, missing a train, or arriving after the start of a performance all became more serious social transgressions because, with everyone carrying watches, there was less excuse for poor timekeeping. The wristwatch at its peak. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the pocket watch reached its technological and social peak. Accuracy had improved to the point where good quality watches could keep time within seconds per day. Railroad workers, whose jobs required precise coordination to prevent collisions, used certified railroad-grade watches that met strict accuracy standards. In 1891, a deadly train collision in Ohio, caused partly by unsynchronized watches, led to strict railroad watch regulations that further improved timekeeping standards. Pocket watches were fashion essentials for men. A gentleman's outfit wasn't complete without a watch chain draped across the waistcoat, leading to a pocket watch whose case might be made of silver, gold, or even platinum. The watch could be paired with various accessories on the chain: a cigar cutter, a seal for stamping wax on letters, a watch key, though most watches now used stem winding, or a decorative fob. Women also had pocket watches, though these were more often decorative pieces worn as pendants on necklaces or pinned to clothing. Women's watches tended to be smaller and more ornate, sometimes featuring enamel painting or precious gems. However, for women, the watch was more often a piece of jewelry than a functional timekeeper. Social norms of the era suggested that women didn't need to be as concerned with precise timekeeping as men, whose professional lives supposedly demanded greater temporal precision. But even as pocket watches reached their peak, a new form of portable timekeeping was emerging, one that would eventually make pocket watches seem old-fashioned and inconvenient: the wristwatch. Chapter 7. From Pockets to Wrists. The wristwatch, which seems so natural to us today, was actually considered somewhat ridiculous and definitely feminine for most of its early history. The concept of strapping a watch to one's wrist dates back centuries. Queen Elizabeth IV of England received what was described as an armed watch, essentially a wristwatch, from Robert Dudley in 1571. However, these early wrist-worn timepieces were rare novelties, not practical timekeepers. The first person often credited with a wristwatch worn regularly for timekeeping was the French mathematician Blaise Pascal in the 17th century, who reportedly tied his pocket watch to his wrist with string so he could see it while writing and calculating. But this was an idiosyncratic solution to a personal problem, not a widespread fashion. The oldest surviving wristwatch as a deliberately designed piece of jewelry dates to 1806, when Napoleon commissioned one from the Parisian jeweler Nitto as a gift for his wife, Empress Josephine. In 1810, the famous Swiss watchmaker Abraham Louis Breguet created a wristwatch for Caroline Murat, Queen of Naples. These were elaborate, expensive pieces meant as jewelry rather than practical timekeepers. The mechanisms were too small and fragile for serious daily use, and the dials too tiny to read easily. Throughout the 19th century, wristwatches were predominantly worn by women as decorative bracelets that happened to tell time. A wealthy woman might wear a delicate wristwatch to a ball or social event, but she probably relied on a larger, more accurate pendant watch or the clocks in her home for actual timekeeping. Men who wore wristwatches were seen as effeminate or eccentric. A proper gentleman kept his watch in his waistcoat pocket, attached to a proper watch chain. The military discovers the wristwatch. The transformation of the wristwatch from feminine jewelry to serious timekeeper began in the military, where soldiers discovered that reading a pocket watch in combat situations was impractical and sometimes dangerous. Imagine trying to coordinate an artillery barrage. navigate through enemy territory, or execute a timed maneuver while reaching into your pocket for your watch. The delay could be fatal. Historical records show that British Army officers began using wristwatches during colonial campaigns in the 1880s, including the Anglo-Burma War of 1885 and the Boer War in South Africa, 1880, 1881, and 1899-1902. These early military wristwatches were often simply pocket watches attached to leather straps with wire loops soldered to the case. They weren't pretty, but they were practical. The company Mappin & Webb began manufacturing what they called campaign watches for British soldiers heading to Sudan in 1898 and scaled up production for the Boer War. Other watchmakers noticed the trend and began designing watches specifically meant to be worn on the wrist rather than adapted from pocket watches. In Europe, German naval officers received specially designed wristwatches from companies like Girard Perregaux around 1880. The Swiss watch industry, always alert to new markets, began developing purpose-built wristwatches with proper lugs, small projections from the case, to attach wrist straps, a design innovation that became standard. World War I. The wristwatch goes mainstream. The true turning point for the wristwatch came with World War I, 1914 to 1918. This conflict, fought in trenches across Europe, required unprecedented coordination between artillery, infantry, and air support. Pocket watches were completely inadequate for the demands of modern warfare. Officers needed to synchronize attacks, coordinate artillery fire with infantry advances, and time complex maneuvers, all while under fire, in trenches, or crawling through no man's land. Soldiers quickly discovered that wristwatches were essential equipment. You could check the time with a quick glance at your wrist without taking your hands off your weapon or exposing yourself by reaching into a pocket. Military procurement officers ordered wristwatches by the tens of thousands. Companies like Omega, Longines, IWC, International Watch Company, and others ramped up production to meet military demand. These military wristwatches needed to be more robust than the delicate jewelry pieces that women had worn. They required protective features, metal grills to protect the crystal from breaking, luminous paint on the hands and hour markers so they could be read in darkness, and water-resistant cases to survive mud, rain, and the generally harsh conditions of trench warfare. The watches also needed to be accurate and reliable. Lives depended on precise timing. One particularly important innovation was the addition of luminous material to watch dials and hands. Early versions used radium paint, which glowed continuously without needing to be charged by light exposure. These radium-painted watches could be read in complete darkness, making them invaluable for night operations. However, radium is radioactive, and many of the young women who painted these dials, known as radium girls, later suffered terrible health consequences from radiation exposure, a tragic reminder that technological progress sometimes comes with hidden costs. By the time World War I ended in 1918, millions of soldiers had become accustomed to wearing wristwatches. When they returned home, they kept wearing them. What had been considered effeminate or eccentric before the war suddenly became normal, practical, and even masculine. The wristwatch had been baptized in the trenches of Europe, and it emerged as the future of personal timekeeping. The interwar period, design and innovation. The 1920s and 1930s saw rapid development in wristwatch design and technology. With the wristwatch now socially acceptable for men, watchmakers competed to create more accurate, more durable, and more stylish timepieces. Several important innovations emerged during this period. In 1926, Rolex introduced the Oyster case, the first truly water-resistant wristwatch case. The company famously had a swimmer wear one while crossing the English Channel to demonstrate its water resistance. An early example of what we'd now call celebrity endorsement and experiential marketing. The Oyster case used a screw-down crown and case back to create a sealed, protective environment for the watch mechanism. In 1931, Jaeger-LeCoultre introduced the Reverso, a watch with a case that could be flipped over to protect the crystal and dial during polo matches. The design was elegant and practical, becoming one of the most iconic watch designs of the Art Deco era. Perhaps the most significant innovation of this period was the automatic, self-winding wristwatch. While self-winding pocket watches had existed since the 18th century, creating an automatic mechanism small enough to fit in a wristwatch case proved challenging. In 1923, British watchmaker John Harwood patented the first practical automatic wristwatch. His design used a weight that swung back and forth as the wearer moved, winding the mainspring automatically. This meant the watch never needed to be manually wound as long as it was worn regularly. Rolex improved on Harwood's design, introducing the perpetual movement in 1931, which featured a rotor that could swing in a full 360-degree arc rather than just back and forth. This became the basis for modern automatic watches and remains essentially unchanged today in principle, though refined in execution. Art Deco and watch design. The wristwatch also became a canvas for artistic expression during the Art Deco period of the 1920s and 1930s. Watches featured geometric designs, colorful enamel work, and innovative case shapes. Cartier's tank watch, introduced in 1917 and inspired by military tanks, became an iconic design that's still produced today. Women's wristwatches, no longer the only wrist-worn timepieces, evolved into increasingly sophisticated pieces. Companies like Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, and Audemars Piguet created elaborate jeweled watches that were both technical marvels and works of art. These luxury pieces helped establish Switzerland's reputation as the center of high-end watchmaking, a reputation it maintains to this day. World War II and technical advancement. World War II, 1939 to 1945, further accelerated wristwatch development. Military forces on all sides required accurate, durable watches for their personnel. The British Ministry of Defense established specifications for military watches, requiring them to meet strict standards for accuracy, water resistance, and durability. 12 Swiss manufacturers, including IWC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, and Omega, produced watches to these specifications. These watches, marked with a broad arrow and the letters AWWWW, watch wrist waterproof, became highly sought after by collectors decades later. German forces wore watches from companies like A. Lange & Söhne, Stowa, and Laco. Japanese forces used watches from Seiko and Citizen. American forces often wore watches from Hamilton, Bulova, Elgin, and Waltham. The war created an enormous demand for watches, pushing manufacturing capacity to its limits and driving technical innovations to meet military requirements. Submarines required watches that could function at depth without leaking. This pushed development of better water-resistant cases and gasket seals. Some of these wartime innovations would later influence civilian watch design, particularly in the emerging market for sports and diving watches. The post-war boom after World War II ended. The world entered a period of economic growth and consumer prosperity, at least in the Western nations. The wristwatch, which had been a relatively expensive item before the war, became more affordable through continued improvements in mass production. By the 1950s, a basic but reliable wristwatch was within reach of most middle-class consumers in developed countries. This democratization of the wristwatch had social implications. Punctuality, which had become more important with industrialization, became a nearly universal expectation. When almost everyone owned a watch, showing up late to work, meetings, or social events became less excusable. Time consciousness became deeply embedded in modern culture, especially in Western and industrialized nations. The 1950s also saw the emergence of the sports watch as a distinct category. In 1953, Rolex introduced the Submariner, designed for scuba diving and water-resistant to 100 meters, later improved to 200 meters and beyond. That same year, Blancpain introduced the 50 Fathoms, another diving watch developed in collaboration with French naval divers. These watches featured rotating bezels that allowed divers to track elapsed time underwater, a critical safety feature. In 1954, Rolex launched the GMT Master, developed for Pan American Airways pilots who needed to track multiple time zones during long international flights. The watch featured a 24-hour hand and a rotating 24-hour bezel, allowing the wearer to read 3 different time zones simultaneously. This innovation addressed a real need created by the jet age, when international travel became faster and more common. Mechanical watchmaking reaches its peak by the early 1960s. Mechanical watchmaking had reached extraordinary levels of sophistication. Swiss watchmakers in particular had refined their craft to near perfection. The annual chronometer competitions in Switzerland pushed watchmakers to achieve ever greater accuracy. A chronometer is a watch that has been tested and certified by an official testing institute, such as QOSC, the Swiss Official Chronometer Testing Institute, established in 1973, though similar testing existed earlier. To earn chronometer certification, a watch must keep time to within very strict tolerances, typically 4 + 6 seconds per day, over 15 days of testing in various positions and temperatures. Complicated watches, timepieces with additional functions beyond just telling time, also reached new heights of sophistication. Watchmakers created minute repeaters, watches that chimed the time on demand, perpetual calendars, automatically adjusting for months with different numbers of days and even leap years, moon phase indicators, split-second chronographs, and combinations of multiple complications in a single watch. The most complicated watch ever made at the time was the Patek Philippe Henri Graves Supercomplication, completed in 1933, which had 24 complications and took 5 years to design and build. The Swiss watch industry seemed unassailable. It had perfected mechanical timekeeping over centuries of accumulated knowledge and skill. Its watches were synonymous with quality, precision, and luxury. Skilled Swiss watchmakers served lengthy apprenticeships to master their craft. The industry's future seemed secure, but a revolution was coming, one that would nearly destroy the Swiss watch industry and completely transform timekeeping. And it would come from an unexpected direction, not from improving mechanical watches, but from abandoning mechanical technology entirely in favor of electronics. Chapter 8. The Quartz Revolution. The story of the Quartz watch begins not with watchmakers, but with scientists studying the properties of crystals. In 1880, French physicists Pierre and Jacques Curie discovered the piezoelectric effect. When certain crystals, particularly quartz, are subjected to mechanical pressure, they generate a small electrical charge. Conversely, when these crystals receive an electrical charge, they vibrate at a very precise frequency. This discovery remained mostly a scientific curiosity for decades, though it found some practical applications in radio technology and other fields. But in the 1920s, scientists realized that the piezoelectric properties of quartz could be used for extremely accurate timekeeping. In 1927, Canadian engineer Warren Marison, working at Bell Telephone Laboratories, built the first quartz clock. Unlike mechanical clocks that used pendulums or balance wheels as their time base, Marison's clock used the vibrations of a quartz crystal. When electrically stimulated, a quartz crystal vibrates at an extremely consistent frequency, 32,768 times per second, written as 32,168 Hertz, became the standard frequency for timekeeping applications because it's a power of 2 to 15, making it easy to divide down to 1 pulse per second using simple digital electronics. These early quartz clocks were large, expensive laboratory instruments, but they were astonishingly accurate, far more so than any mechanical clock or watch. Based on what we know from historical records, early quartz clocks could keep time to within a few thousandths of a second per day, accuracy that no mechanical device could match. Observatories and scientific laboratories adopted quartz clocks for their precision timing needs. Miniaturization begins. The challenge was miniaturizing quartz clock technology enough to fit into a wristwatch. This required several technological developments: smaller, more efficient quartz crystals, miniature electronic circuits to drive the crystal and count its oscillations, and compact batteries to power the whole system. Progress was slow but steady through the 1940s and 1950s. In 1957, the Hamilton Watch Company collaborated with the Elgin National Watch Company to develop the first battery-powered wristwatch. The Hamilton Electric 500, also called the Ventura due to its model name, was released in 1957. However, this watch still used a traditional balance wheel for timekeeping, with the battery simply replacing the mainspring as the power source. It wasn't a true quartz watch, but it represented an important step toward electronic timekeeping. The first truly electronic watch, using a transistorized movement but still with a balance wheel, was the Bulova Accutron, introduced in 1960. The Accutron used a tuning fork vibrating at 360 Hz, compared to 32,768 Hz for later quartz watches, to keep time, driven by a transistorized circuit powered by a battery. The Accutron was significantly more accurate than mechanical watches, keeping time to within about 2 seconds per day. It also produced a distinctive humming sound from its vibrating tuning fork, earning it the nickname, the watch that hums. The first quartz wristwatch. The breakthrough came on December 25, 1969, when Seiko, a Japanese watch company, introduced the Astron, the world's first quartz wristwatch available to the public. This was a revolutionary moment in timekeeping history, though it didn't immediately seem that way to many people in the industry. The Seiko Astron was extraordinary in several ways. It kept time to within 5 seconds per month, accuracy previously available only from room-sized observatory clocks. It required no winding. It had no delicate balance wheel to be affected by shocks. And while it was expensive at launch, costing about the same as a medium-sized car in Japan, Seiko knew that mass production would rapidly bring the cost down. The Astron's introduction on Christmas Day 1969 was deliberately chosen to make a statement. Seiko was announcing that the future of watchmaking had arrived, and it came from Japan, not Switzerland. The Swiss watch industry, which had dominated global watchmaking for centuries, initially dismissed quartz watches as a fad. This would prove to be one of the most catastrophic misjudgments in business history. The quartz crisis. What followed in the 1970s became known in the watch industry as the Quartz Crisis or Quartz Revolution, though crisis applied mainly to Swiss watchmakers, while revolution described what was happening to timekeeping technology in consumer markets. Several factors combined to create a perfect storm for traditional watchmaking. First, quartz watches were genuinely superior for pure timekeeping. They were more accurate, required less maintenance, no need for regular servicing every few years, and were much more shock-resistant than mechanical watches. For consumers who simply wanted to know what time it was, quartz watches were clearly better. Second, quartz technology benefited from rapid cost reduction through economies of scale and improvements in electronics manufacturing. Within a few years, quartz watches went from being expensive luxury items to affordable consumer products. By the mid-1970s, basic quartz watches cost less than mechanical watches of comparable quality. Third, digital display technology emerged alongside quartz movements. The first digital watch, the Pulsar time computer, was introduced in 1970, though in very limited quantities, and became more widely available in 1972. Instead of traditional hands on a dial, these watches displayed the time in numbers using LED, light-emitting diode displays. Early LED watches required the wearer to press a button to light up the display, to conserve battery power, but they looked futuristic and high-tech. The combination of quartz movements and digital displays created watches that seemed to embody the future. Companies like Pulsar, a brand of Hamilton Watch Company, Texas Instruments, and others marketed digital watches as cutting-edge technology. Even luxury brands got into the act. The original Pulsar was sold at jewelry stores and initially cost around $2,100, equivalent to about $15,000 today. Marketed as a status symbol for early adopters. The Swiss industry collapses. The Swiss watch industry, confident in its centuries of expertise and tradition, was slow to respond to the quartz threat. Many Swiss manufacturers believed that consumers would always prefer the craftsmanship and prestige of Swiss mechanical watches. They were tragically wrong. Between 1970 and 1985, Swiss watch employment dropped from about 90,000 workers to about 30,000. Hundreds of Swiss watch companies went bankrupt or were forced to merge with competitors. The number of Swiss watch companies dropped from about 1,600 to fewer than 600. An entire industry, built over centuries and employing skilled craftspeople whose expertise had been passed down through generations, nearly disappeared in the span of about 15 years. Meanwhile, Japanese companies like Seiko, Citizen, and Casio thrived. They embraced quartz technology, improved it, and manufactured watches at volumes that Swiss companies couldn't match. By the late 1970s, Japan dominated the global watch market. Seiko alone was producing millions of watches per year, while individual Swiss companies produced thousands or tens of thousands. Digital watch features proliferate as quartz and digital technology advanced. Watches gained new features that would have been impossible with mechanical movements. Chronograph functions, stopwatch capabilities, could be implemented in electronics much more easily than with mechanical gears. Alarms, multiple time zones, calendars showing the date, day of week, and even the year all became standard features on even inexpensive watches. Calculator watches appeared in the mid-1970s, with Pulsar introducing a calculator watch in 1975. These watches had tiny buttons and could perform basic arithmetic operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. While the calculators were difficult to use due to the tiny buttons, they represented the first smart watches with computing capabilities beyond just timekeeping. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, watch companies experimented with various features. There were watches with games, simple ones like electronic hide and seek, watches with address books, watches that could store phone numbers, watches with radio receivers, and even watches with translation capabilities, storing common phrases in multiple languages. Most of these features were gimmicky and poorly implemented due to the severe constraints of small size and limited battery power, but they foreshadowed the smartwatches that would emerge decades later. LCD, liquid crystal display, technology replaced LED displays by the late 1970s because LCDs consumed much less power and could show the time constantly without requiring a button press. This made digital watches more practical for daily use. The Swiss fight back. The Swiss watch industry's salvation came from an unexpected source: a Swiss engineer named Nicholas Hayek, who would later be called the savior of the Swiss watch industry. In the early 1980s, Hayek was brought in as a consultant to help two struggling Swiss watch companies, SSIH, which owned Omega and Tissot, and Assuag, which owned various other brands, figure out how to survive. Hayek's solution was counterintuitive. Rather than competing directly with Japanese companies on their terms, making cheap quartz watches, he proposed a two-track strategy. The Swiss should embrace quartz technology for affordable watches, but create a completely new kind of product. Fashionable, affordable, colorful quartz watches positioned as accessories and fashion statements, rather than just timekeeping tools. Meanwhile, Swiss companies should emphasize the luxury, craftsmanship, and prestige of high-end mechanical watches, positioning them as status symbols and works of art rather than competing on pure accuracy. This strategy led to the creation of the Swatch, Swiss watch, in 1983. Swatch watches were revolutionary. They were made with very few parts, only 51 components compared to 100 plus in traditional watches. Manufactured mostly by automated processes, available in countless colorful and artistic designs, and sold at affordable prices. But they were Swiss-made, which carried cachet, and they were marketed as fun fashion accessories that people could collect and coordinate with their outfits. Swatch was an enormous success. The company sold over 1 million watches in its first year, and went on to sell hundreds of millions of watches over the following decades. The profits from Swatch helped stabilize the Swiss watch industry and funded the preservation of traditional Swiss watchmaking expertise. Mechanical watches, Reinvented as luxury goods, simultaneously, Swiss high-end brands like Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, and others successfully repositioned mechanical watches as luxury goods and status symbols. They emphasize the craftsmanship involved in creating a fine mechanical movement, with hundreds of tiny components machined to incredible precision and assembled by hand. They highlighted the heritage and tradition of Swiss watchmaking, the years of training required to become a master watchmaker, and the artistry involved in creating complications like perpetual calendars, minute repeaters, and tourbillons, a special mechanism designed to improve accuracy by counteracting the effects of gravity on the balance wheel. This strategy worked remarkably well. By the 1990s and 2000s, expensive mechanical watches had become sought-after luxury items, worn by executives, celebrities, and watch enthusiasts who appreciated the mechanical artistry even while acknowledging that a $10 quartz watch kept better time than a $50,000 mechanical one. Mechanical watches became about much more than just telling time. They were about craft, heritage, artistry, and status. The survival of Swiss mechanical watchmaking, while a small part of the overall watch market by volume, preserved centuries of accumulated knowledge and skill. Today, Swiss mechanical watchmaking thrives as a luxury industry, with collectors paying millions of dollars for rare or exceptionally complicated mechanical watches. But these represent a tiny fraction of all watches sold. The vast majority of watches people actually wear to tell time are quartz watches or, increasingly, smartwatches. Chapter 9. Atomic Precision and the Redefinition of Time. While the watch industry was being transformed by quartz technology, scientists were pushing timekeeping accuracy to extraordinary levels. How accurate does a clock need to be? For daily life, even a cheap quartz watch that gains or loses a few seconds per month is more than adequate. But for science, navigation, and telecommunications, even greater precision was required. The answer came from atomic clocks, which use the vibrations of atoms themselves as their timekeeping element. The concept dates back to 1945, when American physicist Isidore Rabi, who had worked on radar during World War II, suggested that the precise frequencies of atomic transitions could be used to regulate clocks with unprecedented accuracy. The first atomic clock was built in 1949 by Harold Lyons and his team at the National Bureau of Standards, now NIST, in the United States. This clock used ammonia molecules and was more accurate than previous quartz clocks, though it was still a laboratory prototype rather than a practical timekeeping device. The cesium standard. The breakthrough came in 1955 when British physicist Louis Essen, working at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, England, built the first practical cesium atomic clock. This clock used cesium-133 atoms, which, when bombarded with microwaves at precisely the right frequency, 9,192,631,770 Hz, transitioned between two specific energy states. By tuning the microwave frequency until the maximum number of cesium atoms made this transition, the clock could maintain an incredibly stable and precise frequency. Essen's cesium clock was accurate to about 1 second in 300 years. Accuracy far beyond anything possible with mechanical or even quartz timekeeping. This was precision that opened up new possibilities in science, navigation, and telecommunications. The significance of cesium atomic clocks became so profound that in 1967, the international scientific community redefined the second itself. Previously, the second had been defined as 1/86,400 of a mean solar day, 24 hours x 60 minutes x 60 seconds, or for 86,400 seconds. But Earth's rotation isn't perfectly constant. It varies slightly due to tidal effects, geological changes, and other factors. For the highest precision applications, astronomically defined time wasn't good enough. The new definition of the second, which remains the international standard today, is: the second is the duration of 9,192,631,170 periods of the radiation, corresponding to the transition between the two hyperfine levels of the ground state of the cesium-133 atom. This mouthful means that a second is now defined by the number of oscillations of cesium atoms under specific conditions. a definition that can be reproduced in any properly equipped laboratory anywhere in the world, or universe for that matter. This was a remarkable moment in the history of timekeeping. For thousands of years, time had been defined by astronomical observations. The rotation of the Earth, the orbit of the Moon, the Earth's orbit around the Sun. Now time was defined by the properties of matter itself, by the quantum mechanical behavior of atoms. We had moved from measuring time by looking up at the sky to measuring it by looking into the heart of matter. GPS and satellite navigation. One of the most important applications of atomic clocks is the Global Positioning System, GPS. GPS, developed by the U.S. Department of Defense and made fully operational in 1995, though initial satellites were launched in the 1970s, depends entirely on extremely accurate timekeeping. Here's how GPS works. A constellation of satellites orbits Earth, each carrying multiple atomic clocks. Each satellite continuously broadcasts its position and the precise time according to its atomic clocks. A GPS receiver, like the one in your smartphone, picks up signals from multiple satellites. By measuring how long the radio signal takes to reach the receiver from each satellite, and knowing that radio waves travel at the speed of light, the receiver can calculate its distance from each satellite. With distances from at least 4 satellites, the receiver can determine its exact position on Earth through a mathematical process called trilateration. The critical factor is timing accuracy. Radio waves travel at approximately 300,000 kilometers per second, which means they travel about 30 centimeters, about 1 foot, in 1 nanosecond, 1/1000th of a second. If the timing is off by even 1/1,000,000th of a second, the position calculation would be wrong by 300 meters. GPS requires nanosecond-level timing accuracy to provide meter-level position accuracy. This is why every GPS satellite carries multiple atomic clocks, usually rubidium atomic clocks, with some also carrying more accurate cesium or hydrogen maser clocks. The GPS system wouldn't work without atomic clock precision. Our modern world, with its reliance on GPS for everything from navigation apps to emergency services to precision agriculture to international banking timestamps, depends fundamentally on our ability to measure time with atomic accuracy. Interestingly, GPS must also account for Einstein's theories of relativity. Satellites in orbit experience time slightly differently than clocks on Earth's surface due to both special relativity, they're moving fast, and general relativity. They're in a weaker gravitational field. GPS satellite clocks appear to run about 38 microseconds per day, faster than equivalent clocks on Earth. The GPS system compensates for these relativistic effects. Without this compensation, GPS would accumulate position errors of about 10 kilometers per day. Thus, GPS is a practical, everyday application of Einstein's relativity theories. Theories that seemed purely academic when first published. Network timing and the internet-accurate timekeeping is also critical for modern telecommunications and computer networks. The internet, which we often think of as a spatial network connecting computers around the world, is also fundamentally a temporal system requiring precise synchronization. When you load a web page, your computer makes dozens or hundreds of requests to various servers, which may be located on different continents. The servers need to coordinate their responses. Financial transactions require precise timestamps to determine the order of events, critical for stock exchanges where milliseconds can mean millions of dollars. Mobile phone networks need to keep their cell towers synchronized. Data centers synchronize their servers to coordinate operations and maintain records. For these applications, computers use the Network Time Protocol, NTP, which synchronizes clocks across the internet to within milliseconds of Coordinated Universal Time, UTC. For higher precision applications, GPS time signals provide nanosecond-level accuracy. Many telecommunications facilities, data centers, and financial institutions maintain their own GPS receivers or cesium atomic clocks to ensure accurate timekeeping. This means that the modern digital world runs on atomic time. Every Google search, every financial transaction, Every phone call, every text message depends on synchronized clocks, ultimately referenced to atomic standards. We've moved from a world where being late for dinner was the main consequence of inaccurate timekeeping, to one where even microsecond inaccuracies in time measurement could cause financial chaos or network failures. Optical atomic clocks, the future of precision cesium. Atomic clocks remain the international standard, but they're no longer the most accurate clocks humans can build. Since the 1990s, physicists have developed optical atomic clocks that use optical frequencies, visible light, rather than microwave frequencies. These clocks use atoms like strontium, ytterbium, or aluminum ions, whose optical transitions occur at much higher frequencies than cesium's microwave transitions. Why does higher frequency matter? In simple terms, a clock that ticks more times per second can potentially measure time more finely. A cesium clock ticks about 9 billion times per second. An optical atomic clock using strontium atoms ticks about 430 trillion times per second, about 50,000 times faster. Modern optical atomic clocks are accurate to better than 1 second in 15 billion years, longer than the current age of the universe. At this level of accuracy, the clocks are sensitive enough to measure relativistic time dilation caused by height differences of just a centimeter. In other words, a clock 1 centimeter higher than another clock will run measurably faster due to the slightly weaker gravitational field. This extreme precision might seem like scientific overkill, but it has practical applications. Ultra-precise clocks could detect underground cavities or mineral deposits by measuring tiny variations in gravitational field strength. They could help test fundamental physics theories. And they may enable future technologies we can't yet imagine, just as the inventors of the first atomic clocks in the 1950s couldn't have imagined GPS. The international scientific community is considering redefining the second once again, this time based on optical atomic clock standards rather than cesium. This change hasn't been made yet, partly because scientists want to ensure that different types of optical clocks agree with each other to sufficient precision, and partly because the infrastructure for distributing time signals, which currently relies on cesium standards, would need to be updated. Chapter 10. The Smartwatch Revolution. By the early 21st century, timekeeping technology had split into two distinct categories. On one hand were mechanical watches, now luxury items valued for craftsmanship and heritage. On the other were quartz watches, cheap, accurate, and ubiquitous. Both types of watches were purely dedicated to timekeeping, and perhaps some additional functions like chronographs or calendars. But a new category was emerging. Watches that could do much more than tell time. The smartwatch, which seems like a recent innovation, actually has roots going back several decades. But it took the convergence of several technologies, miniaturized electronics, low-power processors, efficient batteries, wireless connectivity, and smartphones, to make smartwatches practical and useful. Early smartwatches. The first watches with computing capabilities beyond simple timekeeping appeared in the 1980s. We've already mentioned calculator watches, which appeared in the 1970s. In 1984, Seiko introduced the UC2000, a watch that could connect to a computer to download information. The watch had 2 kilobytes of memory, enough to store short notes or phone numbers, and used a custom keyboard for data entry before uploading to the watch. While innovative, it was too complex and expensive to gain widespread adoption. In 1994, Seiko introduced the message watch, which could receive pages, remember pagers, from a special service. Users could receive short text messages on their watch, essentially the first notification-capable smartwatch, though with very limited functionality. Casio, always innovative with digital watches, introduced watches with various smart features throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Databanks that could store contact information, watches with television remotes, watches that could receive data from sensors. But these were all special-purpose devices with limited functionality. The first device widely recognized as a true smartwatch was the Samsung SPH WP10, released in 1999 in South Korea. This watch could make and receive phone calls using a built-in speaker and microphone. However, it was bulky, had very short battery life, and didn't catch on widely. Similar attempts by other companies through the early 2000s had limited success. The technology wasn't quite ready, and the use cases weren't compelling enough. Microsoft Spot, an ambitious failure. In 2004, Microsoft launched an ambitious smartwatch platform called Spot, Smart Personal Objects Technology. Spot watches could receive information wirelessly through FM radio signals, news headlines, weather forecasts, stock quotes, sports scores, and other data. Several watch manufacturers partnered with Microsoft to produce Spot watches, including Fossil, Suunto, and Tissot. The concept was ahead of its time in some ways. Wireless data delivery to watches, customizable information streams, and integration with Microsoft services like MSN Direct. However, Spot had several fatal flaws. The data was one-way only. Watches couldn't send information back. The service required a subscription fee. The watches were bulky and unattractive. Battery life was measured in days rather than weeks. And most importantly, smartphones were becoming increasingly capable and popular. Microsoft discontinued the Spot service in 2008, and the watches became useless without the data service. It was an expensive failure, but it demonstrated both interest in smartwatch-type devices and the challenges of making them successful. The smartphone changes everything. The launch of the iPhone in 2007 and the subsequent proliferation of smartphones fundamentally changed the landscape for watches of all types. Suddenly, millions of people carried powerful computers in their pockets that included accurate clocks synchronized via cellular networks. The practical need for a separate wristwatch declined significantly. Many people, especially younger generations, stopped wearing watches altogether. Why bother when your phone tells the time? This trend worried the watch industry, but it also created an opportunity. If the watch could do things the phone couldn't do, or couldn't do as conveniently, it might remain relevant. The answer was to make the watch a companion device to the smartphone, extending the phone's capabilities to the wrist. Pebble, the crowdfunding success. The modern smartwatch era truly began with Pebble, a smartwatch project launched on Kickstarter, a crowdfunding platform, in 2012. Pebble's concept was simple. Create a watch with an e-paper display, like a Kindle e-reader, that could show notifications from a paired smartphone, control music playback, and run simple apps. The e-paper display meant excellent outdoor visibility and multi-day battery life, important advantages over previous smartwatch attempts. The Pebble Kickstarter campaign became one of the most successful crowdfunding projects ever, raising over $10 million from more than 68,000 backers who believed in the concept. When Pebble watches shipped in 2013, they proved that there was real demand for smartwatches done right. The watches were practical, fun, and useful. They let users see incoming calls, text messages, and other notifications without pulling out their phones, a surprisingly valuable convenience. Pebble's success demonstrated the smartwatch market potential and inspired larger companies to take the category seriously. Unfortunately for Pebble, they were small startup competing against technology giants with vastly more resources. Pebble struggled to compete and eventually sold to Fitbit in 2016, with the Pebble product line being discontinued. Samsung and Google entered the market. A major electronics company launched its first smartwatch, the Galaxy Gear, in 2013. The Gear was more ambitious than Pebble, with a color touchscreen, camera, and integration with Samsung smartphones. However, it was also more expensive, had shorter battery life, measured in less than a day, and worked only with Samsung phones. Still, it demonstrated that major manufacturers saw potential in the smartwatch category. Google, already dominant in smartphone operating systems with Android, announced Android Wear in 2014, later renamed Wear OS. This operating system could power smartwatches from various manufacturers, similar to how Android powers phones from many companies. Several manufacturers launched Android Wear watches, including Motorola, Moto 360, LG, and Asus. These early Android Wear watches had mixed success. They offered extensive functionality: Google Now, a voice assistant, Google Maps navigation on your wrist, extensive notification support, and thousands of apps. However, they also had significant drawbacks: poor battery life, often less than a day, reliance on their paired smartphone for most functions, limited fitness tracking capabilities, and sometimes laggy performance. Apple Watch, the category-defining device. The smartwatch category truly went mainstream with the Apple Watch, announced in September 2014 and released in April 2015. Apple, which had revolutionized smartphones with the iPhone and tablets with the iPad, brought its design philosophy and ecosystem integration to watches. The first Apple Watch had a rectangular face with a high-resolution touchscreen, a digital crown for navigation, echoing traditional watch design, extensive fitness tracking capabilities, and deep integration with the iPhone. It could display notifications, run apps, make payments via Apple Pay, monitor heart rate, track workouts, and much more. Apple also paid attention to aesthetics in a way previous smartwatch makers hadn't. The watch came in multiple case materials: aluminum, stainless steel, and gold, various sizes, and with extensive band options: sport bands, leather bands, metal link bracelets, and designer collaborations. Apple positioned the watch not just as a tech gadget, but as a fashion accessory and jewelry piece, much like traditional watches. The Apple Watch faced initial skepticism. Critics questioned whether people really needed another device, especially one tethered to the iPhone. Battery life was limited to about a day, requiring nightly charging. The value proposition wasn't immediately obvious to everyone, but Apple persisted and iterated. Each new generation brought improvements: better processors for smoother performance, brighter displays, improved battery life, cellular connectivity, allowing the watch to function independently of the iPhone for calls and data, more sophisticated health monitoring, and refined software. By 2017, Apple Watch had become the best-selling watch of any type in the world, surpassing traditional Swiss watch companies like Rolex in sales volume, though not revenue. Health and fitness, the killer application. As smartwatches evolved, health and fitness tracking emerged as their most compelling feature. While telling time and showing notifications were useful, monitoring health provided unique value that smartphones couldn't match. A watch worn continuously on the wrist can collect data that a phone in your pocket cannot. Heart rate throughout the day, sleep patterns, step counts with high accuracy, and more. Apple Watch introduced features like heart rate monitoring, ECG, electrocardiogram capabilities, fall detection for elderly users, irregular heart rhythm notifications, and blood oxygen monitoring. These features weren't just gadgets. They had real health implications. There are documented cases of Apple Watch alerting users to serious heart conditions like atrial fibrillation, potentially saving lives by prompting them to seek medical care. Other smartwatch manufacturers followed suit. Samsung's Galaxy Watch added blood pressure monitoring and body composition analysis. Fitbit, acquired by Google in 2021, specialized in fitness tracking with detailed metrics for workouts, sleep quality, stress levels, and more. Garmin focused on serious athletes with advanced training metrics, detailed workout analysis, and multi-sport tracking. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated interest in health monitoring. Studies explored whether smartwatches could detect COVID-19 infections early by monitoring heart rate variability, blood oxygen levels, and other metrics. While not diagnostic tools, smartwatches contributed to health awareness and early symptom detection. The smartwatch ecosystem today. As of 2024 to 2025, the smartwatch market is diverse and mature. The major players include Apple Watch. Dominates the premium smartwatch segment with deep iOS integration, extensive health features, large app ecosystem, and strong brand appeal. However, it only works with iPhones, limiting its potential market. Samsung Galaxy Watch. the leading alternative for Android users, featuring Samsung's Tizen OS, later replaced with Wear OS in partnership with Google. Comprehensive health tracking and compatibility with Android phones. Google's Wear OS powers various smartwatches from different manufacturers, including Fossil, TicWatch, and others. Offers the most open ecosystem, but sometimes suffers from fragmentation and inconsistent quality across devices. Garmin focuses on fitness enthusiasts and athletes with exceptional battery life, often a week or more, detailed training metrics, and specialized sports features. Less focused on smart features, more on fitness and outdoor activities. Fitbit. Acquired by Google, these devices emphasize health and fitness tracking with excellent sleep monitoring and a large community for motivation and challenges. Luxury smartwatches. Traditional watch brands entered the smartwatch market with mixed results. Tag Heuer, Montblanc, and Louis Vuitton released luxury smartwatches combining traditional design aesthetics with smart features, targeting consumers who want both prestige and functionality. Smartwatch capabilities have expanded far beyond initial expectations. Modern smartwatches can make phone calls, send text messages via dictation or predefined responses, make payments via NFC, provide turn-by-turn navigation, control smart home devices, track detailed sleep patterns, monitor multiple health metrics, run thousands of apps, receive and respond to notifications from virtually any smartphone app, track dozens of different workout types, and even detect when the wearer has fallen and automatically call emergency services. Battery life remains a challenge, with most smartwatches requiring charging every 1 to 3 days, though some fitness-focused models can last a week or more. This limitation means that smartwatches haven't completely replaced traditional watches. Many watch enthusiasts still prefer mechanical or high-end quartz watches for their aesthetics, craftsmanship, and the fact that they don't need charging. Some people wear traditional watches for formal occasions, and smartwatches for fitness and casual use. Chapter 11. The smartphone becomes our clock, while smartwatches represent the latest wearable timekeeping technology. For most people in the 21st century, their primary timekeeper isn't a watch at all. It's their smartphone. This represents a curious historical circle. We went from large public clocks to portable pocket watches to smaller wristwatches, and now back to checking the time on a device we carry in our pocket or purse. Smartphones have several advantages as timekeepers. They synchronize automatically with network time signals, ensuring accuracy within milliseconds. They automatically adjust for time zones when traveling and handle daylight saving time changes without user intervention. Their large screens can display time in numerous formats and provide extensive information beyond just hours and minutes. And unlike watches, most people carry their smartphones constantly throughout the day. The shift to smartphones as primary timekeepers has had interesting social effects. Research suggests that people, particularly younger generations, check their phones dozens or even hundreds of times per day. A behavior pattern that would have been impossible and meaningless with traditional watches. This constant time checking, combined with constant connectivity to messages, social media, and other apps, has created what some psychologists call time poverty. A feeling of never having enough time despite having precise knowledge of what time it is at every moment. Ironically, the very precision and ubiquity of modern timekeeping may have made us more stressed about time rather than less. When everyone has a perfectly synchronized clock in their pocket, there's less excuse for lateness, less flexibility in schedules, and more pressure to respond immediately to messages and notifications. The tyranny of the clock that medieval and Renaissance writers complained about has intensified in the smartphone era. The digital clock. Everywhere beyond smartphones and smartwatches, digital clocks are now embedded throughout our environment. They appear on appliances, microwaves, ovens, coffee makers, entertainment devices, TVs, cable boxes, game consoles, computers and tablets, car dashboards, public transportation displays, fitness equipment, and countless other devices. We're surrounded by time displays, always aware of what time it is. This ubiquity of time awareness would seem strange to our ancestors. For most of human history, most people had only approximate knowledge of the current time, and this was sufficient for their needs. Now, we can know the time to the second at any moment, synchronized globally via atomic clocks and network protocols. We've achieved unprecedented temporal precision and coordination. Yet this raises philosophical questions about our relationship with time. Has precise timekeeping improved human life? Or has it simply added stress and constraint? Do we control time? Or does our need to measure it control us? These questions don't have simple answers, but they're worth pondering as we consider how timekeeping technology has shaped human civilization. The cultural shift. The smartphone as primary timekeeper has contributed to declining wristwatch wearing, particularly among younger people. Surveys show that significant percentages of young adults don't own watches and see no need for them when their phones tell time. This represents a major cultural shift from the 20th century, when wearing a watch was nearly universal among adults in developed countries. The decline of traditional watch wearing has also been observed through decreased watch sales in certain categories, particularly inexpensive fashion watches. The middle market for watches, too expensive to be throwaway items but not expensive enough to be luxury goods, has been especially affected. Why buy a $200 fashion watch when your smartphone tells time and a $30 Casio or Timex would serve the same function? Watches are increasingly divided into two categories: luxury timepieces valued for craft and status, and functional devices, smartwatches, valued for their capabilities beyond timekeeping. The simple timekeeper for the masses is increasingly just another function of the smartphone. Chapter 12. The Future of Timekeeping. As we look toward the future, what comes next for timekeeping technology? Several trends and emerging technologies suggest possible directions. Quantum timekeeping. Beyond optical atomic clocks, the next frontier in ultra-precise timekeeping may be quantum clocks based on quantum entanglement and other quantum mechanical phenomena. These clocks could potentially be even more accurate than current optical atomic clocks, though the practical applications of such extreme precision remain to be fully explored. Quantum technologies might also enable new capabilities. Quantum networks, which use entangled particles to communicate information, require precise time synchronization. Quantum sensors might use the extreme precision of quantum clocks to detect gravitational waves, map Earth's gravitational field in detail, or probe fundamental physics questions. Biological clocks and personalized time. While we've focused on external timekeeping devices, humans also have internal biological clocks that regulate our sleep-wake cycles, hunger, alertness, and numerous other physiological processes. These circadian rhythms are controlled by genes and neurons in the brain and are influenced by environmental cues like light and darkness. Modern research is revealing the importance of aligning our activities with our biological clocks. Chronobiology, the study of biological rhythms, suggests that people have different natural chronotypes. Some are morning larks, naturally waking early and being most alert in the morning, while others are night owls, naturally staying up late and being most alert in the evening. Working against your natural chronotype can negatively affect health, mood, and performance. Future timekeeping devices might incorporate biological clock monitoring, helping people optimize their schedules according to their personal chronobiology. Smartwatches already track sleep patterns and provide some insights into circadian rhythms. Future devices might provide more sophisticated guidance. Based on your sleep patterns and activity levels, your optimal time for creative work is between 10 a.m. and noon, while your best time for physical exercise is 4-6 p.m. This represents a shift from universal synchronized time, everyone working 9 to 5, toward personalized time adapted to individual biology. While unlikely to fully replace synchronized time, society still needs to coordinate activities. Greater awareness of biological clocks might lead to more flexible and health-conscious approaches to scheduling. Augmented reality and time displays. As augmented reality, AR, glasses, and other wearable displays potentially become mainstream, They could change how we perceive and interact with time. Instead of glancing at a watch or phone, time information could be continuously visible in your field of vision, displayed only when needed, or integrated with other contextual information. AR could also provide time-related information in more intuitive ways. Instead of showing 3:47 p.m., an AR display might show, "You have 13 minutes until your next meeting," or "Your drive home typically takes 35 minutes at this time, but current traffic suggests 48 minutes today. You should leave soon." This represents a shift from abstract time, hours and minutes, to contextual time, how much time until relevant events. The end of time zones? Currently, the world is divided into time zones, each typically 1 hour apart, aligned roughly with longitudinal divisions. Time zones exist because local solar time varies by location. When it's noon in London, sun highest in the sky. It's earlier in New York and later in Tokyo. Time zones approximate local solar time while providing some standardization. However, in our globally connected world, time zones create complexity. Scheduling international meetings requires juggling multiple time zones. Travelers experience jet lag partly due to crossing time zones. International businesses operate across zones, requiring employees to work outside normal daylight hours. Some have proposed abolishing time zones entirely, with the entire world using a single reference time, like UTC. Local customs would adapt. Maybe people in Tokyo would typically work 00 hours to 8 hours UTC, while people in New York would typically work 13 hours to 21 hours UTC. This might seem strange at first, but proponents argue it would eliminate confusion and simplify global coordination. Such a change seems unlikely in the near term due to the massive cultural and practical inertia behind current time systems. But in a world where most people check their phones for the time rather than observing the sun's position, the connection between local solar time and clock time has already weakened. Previous time standardizations, like the adoption of time zones in the late 19th century, occurred when compelling practical benefits outweighed tradition and habit. A similar threshold might eventually be reached for worldwide time standardization. Will we still wear watches? The future of wrist-worn devices is likely to be smartwatches and specialized fitness trackers rather than traditional watches for most people. However, traditional mechanical and high-end quartz watches will likely persist in the luxury market. Just as fountain pens haven't disappeared despite ballpoint pens and keyboards, mechanical watches continue to appeal to enthusiasts who appreciate craftsmanship and tradition. Smartwatches will probably continue improving in capability and battery life. Future iterations might include more comprehensive health monitoring, continuous glucose monitoring for diabetes management, blood pressure monitoring, early disease detection, enhanced environmental sensors, air quality, UV exposure, temperature, improved battery technology, potentially lasting weeks rather than days, more advanced processors enabling complex on-device AI, and better integration with other smart devices and services. The distinction between smartwatches and smartphones may blur. Flexible displays might allow for devices that wrap around the wrist, but can unroll to provide larger screen area. Or AR glasses might largely replace both watches and phones for information display, with computation happening in cloud servers or small wearable devices. The philosophy of time measurement. We conclude this journey through timekeeping history. It's worth reflecting on what all this technology means philosophically. Time itself is one of the universe's fundamental dimensions, intimately connected with space in Einstein's spacetime. Yet our perception and measurement of time is distinctly human. We've gone from observing the sun's shadow to counting oscillations of cesium atoms at 9 billion cycles per second. We've gone from church bells marking approximate hours to atomic clocks precise to better than a second in 15 billion years. We've gone from each village keeping its own local time to a globally synchronized system that coordinates activities across the planet. This progression represents more than just technological advancement. It reflects humanity's increasing desire and ability to coordinate complex activities, to optimize efficiency, to schedule and plan with precision. It has enabled tremendous progress. Precise navigation enabling global trade, synchronized communications networks, scientific measurements revealing the universe's secrets, and countless other achievements. Conclusion. From shadows to smartwatches, our journey has taken us from ancient Egypt, where priests noticed the pattern of shadows cast by an obelisk, through thousands of years of innovation. Water flowing through carefully calibrated containers, mechanical gears driven by falling weights or coiled springs, pendulums swinging with mathematical precision, quartz crystals vibrating at 32,768 times per second, cesium atoms transitioning between energy states 9 billion times per second, and finally to smartwatches that monitor our heartbeats and remind us of appointments. Each stage built on what came before. The mechanical clock borrowed the escapement concept from automatic bells. The pocket watch miniaturized the tower clock. The wristwatch adapted the pocket watch for convenience. The quartz watch replaced mechanical movements with electronic oscillators. The atomic clock used quantum mechanical atomic transitions. The smartwatch combined timekeeping with computing, communication, and sensors. Throughout this history, timekeeping has been driven by specific needs. Agriculturalists needed to track seasons. Monks needed to schedule prayers. Sailors needed to determine longitude. Scientists needed precision for measurements. And modern society needs coordination across global networks. Each need drove innovation, and each innovation changed how humans related to time. Today, time is simultaneously ever-present and increasingly abstract. We're surrounded by time displays, yet many of us rarely think about the sun's position or the star's movement. We know the precise time to the second, synchronized globally via atomic clocks and network protocols, yet we often feel we don't have enough time. We've mastered measuring time, but perhaps not mastering how we use it. The story of timekeeping is ultimately a story about human ingenuity and our relationship with one of the universe's fundamental dimensions. From shadows to smartwatches, we've continually sought better ways to measure, coordinate, and understand time. As we look to the future, new technologies will undoubtedly emerge, continuing this ancient quest to capture and comprehend something that flows constantly, invisibly, and unstoppably, carrying all of us forward from moment to moment, from past through present toward an unknown future. The sun still casts shadows, as it did when ancient priests first noticed the pattern those thousands of years ago. But now we measure those shadows' movement with atomic precision, display it on glowing screens, and use it to coordinate activities across the planet. We've come remarkably far in our quest to understand and measure time. Yet in another sense, we're still doing what humans have always done, trying to make sense of the invisible current that carries us through our lives, marking its passage so we can navigate our journey from birth to death with purpose, coordination, and meaning. Time, as always, marches on,